The Ronald L. Evangelistic Association is pleased to present Wes White with Turn the Page, featuring Ron Dart.
If you know a little bit of Latin, then you probably know that the word Rex means king and that the word Lex means law. Question: which is greater? Is the law greater than the king, or is the king greater than the law? Throughout all of man's history, rulers and subjects have been debating this very question. In the program you're about to hear, Ron Dart examines the relationship between Jesus and God's law. Because we have to understand that right at the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry, he established that he is actually superior to the law and that the law is the expression of his will for mankind. Let's understand. Sin is transgression of the law, and sin has consequences. Jesus has the authority to forgive sins because he's the king. But there is still the law. Therefore, it's still sin to transgress the law, and Jesus is greater than both sin and the law. While Jesus rejected the extra biblical rules that the Pharisees added to the law, he never rejected the law itself. And why is it that the law is so special that Jesus never rejected it? Because the law of God is a guide to life, not a mere set of rules. The fact that Jesus may have permitted an occasional exception to the law in no way abrogates that law. Again, the law is not king, Jesus is king. So, let's turn the page back to 1996 for an eye-opening sermon from the late Ronald L. Dart entitled simply, Rex Lex.
We humans are a little bit schizophrenic when it comes to rules. Rule comes from a Latin word which basically means a straight stick. And the straight stick is used for drawing straight lines. And all of us know what a ruler is. We carried them in our school pack for, so many years, and to this day have one tucked away in a desk drawer or somewhere in the house that we can pull out a rule. And our rulers have inches on them. I don't know what they had on the Latin rulers in years gone by, but the whole idea of the ruler is to draw a straight line. And oddly enough, a great deal of rule making in society is concerned with line drawing. In other words, you draw a line, and sometimes the line is relatively arbitrary. We just changed one of those arbitrary lines in our country recently. We decided instead of having to drive 55 miles an hour, that we can go back in a lot of venues driving 70 miles an hour again, to the great cheer of people who got bored looking at the highway, who got tired of breaking the law, I should say, and driving 70 miles an hour anyway and taking the risk that was involved in it. We're schizophrenic about rules because we like rules and we hate rules. We like rules because they give a kind of an orderliness to life. We like to know where the boundaries are. We like to know where we're legal, for sure, and we can feel safe and that somebody's not going to call us on this particular item. We like rules because it's good to know when you're pleasing somebody and when you're not pleasing somebody. We hate rules because rules can be oppressive and they can be restrictive, because freedom is wonderful, although it carries certain responsibilities that go along with it. But basic to human nature, there is a desire to be free from external restraint. And so while rules are good and we like rules in one way, the basic human nature that says I don't really like any kind of restraint on me doesn't like rules. And so we have that little struggle that we have to work with on these two things. And out of this little, what shall I say, schizophrenic tendency that we have of looking at this way, grows one of the most specious arguments that you'll find anywhere in the Bible, the argument about law or grace. Now, my sermon today is not about the law or grace argument. I'm not going into that side of things. But it is about how Jesus had to deal with this schizophrenic attitude of man toward rules very early in his ministry, and how he had to work his way into this as he came into a society where there was a rules-dominated establishment, a religious establishment that was rules-dominated. Most of the old arguments on the law, as we find them theologically today, focus on whether or which ones were abolished and which of them were not abolished. But in Matthew 5, we come to a situation where Jesus, knowing what he was up against, knowing what he was going to have to do, and knowing what he was going to try to explain to these people, approached the subject to try to get it clear right from the very beginning so people would not misunderstand him. In Matthew 5 and verse 17, he says this, "Don't think that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, I am come to fulfill. Verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till everything has been fulfilled, or rather, in the Greek, till everything has come to pass. Have heaven and earth passed? You can stick your head outside and check. They have not. And in fact, he says, until heaven and earth pass, not one dot, not one comma, not one stroke of the pen will pass from the law till everything has come to pass. Now, whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever shall do and teach them, it shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, Jesus made it clear right off that not one stroke of the pen out of the law had been or would be abolished in what he was about to say and do. Now, in doing this, he immediately posed a very awkward problem for people who study the Bible, try to live by the Bible and the words in the Bible. What do we do about those laws that we find in the Old Testament that common sense tells us we not only should not do, but we really cannot do in the 20th century? They don't work here. They have no place here. They can't function here. I won't take the time today to go give you illustrations of that, because that's another subject all by itself. I think most of you, if you studied your Bible very much, have from time to time stumbled onto something in the Old Testament that was troubling to you, that you weren't really sure why God ever had it done in the first place, much less that something that we should attempt to do now in the 20th century. And you would think that the cognitive dissonance that this creates would cause us to look more carefully at this question. But frankly, I have seen very, very few people who will take the time to look carefully at the question. What is it that Jesus has posed for us in these laws, and then why is this a problem for us as we face it here? There is an old idea that's talked about sometimes in governance and in papers on governance that people write. It is called Lex Rex. The other side of the coin is called Rex Lex. Two Latin words, the word for king and the word for law. And the phrases mean essentially this: Lex Rex, the law rules. The law is king. On the other hand, Rex Lex says the king is law. Now, you don't have to think about this very long if I were to ask you, well, which system do we live under in this country? Well, it's obviously Lex Rex. The law is king. How many times you will hear in political debate and discussion that we live in a society that is directed and controlled by law. We live under laws. And we get very agitated if we find that the people who we elect to govern us are themselves not living by the laws that they expect us to live under. That they will pass laws in Congress, and have in years gone by, and exempted themselves from it. It's a kind of a funny little thing about, it's almost like Rex Lex. In other words, that we are the king, we made the law, we can change it. But the fact of the matter is, they aren't the king. They are us. We elected them, we sent them to Congress, and we expect them to do what the people of the country want, and we expect law to rule in our country. So we deal with it from that point of view. The law is king. But now when you come down to the New Testament, when you're looking at God, are you talking about the law being king? Or is God king? Which is it? The law or God? That really is not that hard to figure when you really consider what's involved with it. Now, in the absence of a king, you can't do much else except accept the fact that the law is king, that we are in a society of laws and the laws rule. But the law is hard, and it's cold, and it's merciless, all by itself. The law says you got to die, you got to die. And that's all there is to it. But the law, when we come to it in the Bible, the law is really a manifestation of the character of God. It is a revelation of what works in life and what does not work in life. Now, with this in mind, I want to try to work you through a passage in Mark that I think may help you to understand some important things, or maybe at least look at some important things in a little different way. In the first chapter of Mark, and I'll begin reading and talking about this in about verse 21 of Mark 1. Now, up until this time, Mark gives a very, very brief treatment, I think briefer than certainly than Luke does, to the birth of Christ and all the developments. And just from 1 to 21, you have covered the birth, the baptism, the temptation, and the calling of the 12 disciples. He gets all this first stuff out of the way And then when he gets it out of the way in those 20 verses, he turns in verse 21 to some very important things. And really, in a sense, what's a good thing to do when you read a gospel like Mark or Matthew, you ask yourself, okay, what is it that when Mark sat down and began to put this on paper, why did he choose to tell us these things? And why did he choose to tell us these things in this order and in this juxtaposition? Why did he put these things where they are? What's his point that he's trying to make? Well, oddly enough, at this point, he chooses to put this in here very early because he is dealing with the same fundamental problem that Matthew pulled into the Sermon on the Mount, which is just introductory basic Christianity. Don't think I've come to destroy the law. I have not come to destroy the law. Well, now, Mark approaches it from a different point of view and does not even cite that particular reference. But he discusses some events that take place very early that start establishing some ideas. It says they went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one that had authority, and not like the scribes. So he walks in here as one who carries authority in himself. Think about it. Not somebody that's depending on an external authority, like the law. For the scribes, the Pharisees, they would look to the law for their authority. And they used the law as though the law were rules. Now, there is a difference between a law and a rule, because the law is not so interested in line drawing as it is in revealing to us the ways of life that work and the ways of life that don't work. But I'll try to explain that a little further as I go along. Jesus taught as one that had authority. The scribes, on the other hand, drew their authority from somewhere else. And there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. Now, this is not unrelated, folks. Listen to what it says. He said, this unclean spirit said, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Are you come to destroy us? I know who you are. You're the Holy One of God." And Jesus rebuked him and said, "Shut up. Hold your peace. Come out of him." And when the unclean spirit had torn him and cried with a loud voice, he came out of him. And they were all amazed, and they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? What new doctrine is this?" It is odd that the word doctrine came into this at this point. This is not doctrine. He commanded the Spirit to come out, and the Spirit came out. Doctrine is teaching, argumentation, explanation, pulling scriptures and laws and expounding the law to people. What new doctrine is this? For with authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. Okay, where is this authority thing? He taught with authority, he commanded with authority, and the demon had to go. Right off the bat, he is establishing the principle of Rex Lex. The king is the law, and Jesus is the king. He is the Prince of Peace, and he didn't come to this world as one who would come under the authority of the law. He was the one whose character was expressed in the law, and so that he is the king, not the law, which is something the Pharisees, I think, would have been totally foreign to their way of thinking. I don't think the thought so much as even crossed their mind. Now, he continues with this and develops the theme that he develops, and says, "Immediately his fame spread abroad throughout all the region round about Galilee. And forthwith, when they were come out of the synagogue, they entered into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. But Simon's wife's mother was sick of a fever, and anon they told him about it. Well, he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she ministered to them and took care of them. And at evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him every one that was diseased, and all those people who were possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door." They'd heard about what happened, that this demon-possessed man is in there interrupting everything that's going on, and he commands the demon to come out of it. And it left, and everybody had heard. So the whole city gathered together at the door, and he healed many that were sick of various diseases, and he cast out many demons, and he did not permit them to speak, because the demons knew him. And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out and left to a solitary place, and there prayed. It was very, very difficult, once Jesus' ministry began, for him to ever be alone, and to have the privacy of time to think and to draw close to God. And Simon and they that were with him followed after him, and when they had found him, they said, "Everybody's looking for you. All of them are seeking for you." He said, "Let us go in the next towns, that I may preach there also, because that's why I am here." And so he preached in all their synagogues throughout all Galilee, and he was casting out demons here and there. And there came a leper to him, beseeching him, kneeling down to him, and saying to him, "If you will, you can make me clean." Now this, if you can't appreciate what it meant to be a leper, you're probably not going to have the kind of sympathy in this place in the story that you might otherwise have. For there could have been nothing really apart from death itself, but death is a release. There could have been nothing in that society, in that world, that put a man under such terrible bondage as the disease of leprosy. Because everyone was so afraid of leprosy as a contagious ailment, a disease that could be transmitted from one person so easily to another, that as they went on their way, they were required to cover their mouth and to yell, "Unclean, unclean," so that people could get away from them as they walked down the street. You had no life. And this man had heard about Jesus and heard what he had done and how he had been able to cast out a demon just by saying the word. And he had faith. And he came and he knelt down to Jesus before him, on his knees, in the floor, in the dust, and said, "If you will, you can make me clean." No questions, no arguments, not "I hope you can," or "Would you mind?" He said, "If you will." Suggesting, and the question was, if you have the will to do it. And Jesus was moved with compassion, and he put forth his hand and touched him, and said unto him, "I will, be thou clean." The passage is interesting to me, not so much as a direct fallout of what I'm trying to talk to you about today, as it is of the fact that the divine will is expressed in the situation, and the divine will is motivated by compassion. He was moved with compassion. Now, what if he hadn't been? What if he had not felt anything in particular for this guy at all? What if he had been hurrying from one place to another and just said, "Well, just another poor, sick leper on his way"? But the truth is, he looked upon the man, and he was sorry for him. And I can imagine that the pitiful state of this man had something to do with the way in which Jesus Christ responded to him. And it's a funny thing, as a minister over the years, I have had occasion to anoint and pray for many sick people. And it is very hard for me to tell you what makes the difference, but there are times when I know that God is there, and there are times when I hope that God is there. And those times when I know God is there are almost inevitably marked by compassion. And it's not that I feel that I'm a compassionate person at one time and not a compassionate person at another. But there are circumstances, there are times, there are places, there are people, there are sicknesses, there are illnesses that do get down inside of you and touch you. And when they have touched you, they do something to you. And it's been remarkable the number of times that when that has been there, that the healing has come almost instantaneously in every case. They have not been, I've never healed a blind man. I have never seen a withered hand come straight. But I have seen pain disappear just like that, in circumstances like that, to see people liberated from very difficult situations that they were in. But never have I ever experienced it in terms of a really great, all of a sudden cancer is there just today and tomorrow the doctor comes and finds the cancer is gone. I have never experienced that. I do not understand it. I will tell you, though, that it seems to be completely independent of my own personal spiritual condition. Because it has happened when I really have not felt particularly close to God, and it has not happened when I have. So these things are there. Now, in Jesus' case, he walks into the scene, and he carries with him in his body, in his life, a divine will. And the man just came to him and he said, "If you will, if it is your will, you can do this for me." And Jesus said, "I will, be thou clean." Now, as he goes on from this, as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, just like that. He was cleansed. And he straightly charged him forthwith and sent him away and said, "See that you say nothing to any man." And I guess he gave the poor man an instruction beyond what he was able to manage. "Go show yourself to the priest, offer for your cleansing those things that Moses commanded for a testimony to them." And he went out and began to publish it much and to blaze abroad the matter. What is interesting is that Jesus told this man to obey the rules, didn't he? Just carry out the rules. Why did he do that? Why didn't he just say there's no need for that. You're healed, you're clean, there's no problem with it. He did it because in society there was a reason for the rule. And that is, you had the priest in those days actually served almost like a sanitation department or a department of health. They had to look at houses that had mildew in them. They had to look at people who had infections. And sometimes they had to quarantine people because of the infections and the troubles that they had. So Jesus told the man, follow the rules, go on down, show yourself to the priest, make the commanded offering, and go forth. But the man went out and began to publish it much and to blaze abroad the matter, and it came to the place that Jesus could no more openly enter into the city. He was outside in the desert places, and they came to him from every direction. I can easily understand that. And when you see this, you begin to understand also why Jesus told him, don't tell anybody. Why he commanded the demons not to speak to anybody. Why he wanted to maintain this, because it was not Jesus' objective to come in here and empty out all the hospitals. And it's true, he did not heal every sick person he encountered. He did not start at the south of Judea and work his way north, healing every sick person as he came to them like a wave, did he? Why? Because, to me, in one sense of the word, the healings of Jesus are not what is remarkable. It is the non-healings that are remarkable. For if you could do it, if you could actually make people who have cancer whole right now by laying hands on them, where would you start? And when would you be through? Could you turn anyone down? Would you be able to say, no, I won't come to the hospital. No, I won't come to your house. And yet Jesus had something going on here that he did not want the whole countryside coming to him immediately, because his healings had to do with something beyond merely the relief of human suffering, because that is a part of life. That's a part of growing. It's a part of even drawing near to God, is learning how to endure suffering. So what was he actually doing? Well, part of this is revealed to us in the next chapter. And I'll just remind you, which you probably already know, that the chapter and verse markings here are not in the original at all. Somebody put them in later for convenience so we could find, and I could tell you where to look and you know where to go. But the story continues, and it continues with good reason. Again he entered into Capernaum, and after some days it was noised that he was in the house. And as soon as they knew he was there, all of a sudden there were gathered together so many people that there was no room to receive them, not even outside the door. I mean, not only was there no more room in the house, there wasn't even room standing outside the door for people to get close enough to hear what Jesus was saying in through the door. And he preached the word to them. And they come to him bringing one sick of the palsy, which was borne and carried by 4 people. And when they could not get near to him for the press, they uncovered the roof where he was, and when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the sick of palsy, Son, your sins are forgiven you. Now, I don't know what that man had hoped for. When his guys brought him down here and they tore up the roof, here comes the dust all cascading around. Next there's sunlight, and after the sunlight comes this pallet let down on ropes in front of Jesus. And he looks at this man and he says, Son, your sins be forgiven you. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there, reasoning in their hearts, saying, Why does this man speak blasphemies? Who can forgive God who can forgive sin but God only? And who indeed? Now, in saying what he said on this occasion, and Jesus will make it a little clearer as he goes along, he took out one of these great staplers that we see sometime, and he stapled together irrevocably sin and sickness. So that everybody will understand, not necessarily that the sickness that you have in your body now is because of some particular direct sin that we can connect it to over here. That is not so much the point. The fact of the matter is, though, he connected sin and consequences. Shall we put it that way? Sin has consequences. Now, we all know by now, I hope, that sin is the transgression of the law, right? 1 John 3:4. And of course, we don't need 1 John 3:4. We could find it by working our way through a number of different references to sin, and what this is a sin, and that's a sin, and the other thing is a sin. And very shortly we begin to realize that which tells us the difference between right conduct and wrong conduct is the law, and it's that wrong conduct which is sin. Now, when he said to this man, Your sins be forgiven you, what has he acknowledged? hasn't he acknowledged at this point that the law exists and is in effect? There's hardly any possibility that it could be otherwise. So this man is a sinner. He says, son, your sins are forgiven you. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there reasoning and says, now, who can forgive sins but God only? And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they reasoned that way, he said, why are you reasoning this way in your hearts? Which is easier to say, the sick of the palsy, your sins are forgiven you, or to say, rise up and take your bed and walk? Which one's easier? It makes no difference to me. I said it this way so that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sin. Why? Because he is the king. And the king is law. Law is not the king. He had the full authority to forgive this man of his sins. And he did it. Just like that. I was really kind of a fascinating thing when you begin to grasp what he is actually establishing here. Sin is still there. Now, the thing that is hard, I think, sometimes for people to get in their minds is that you can, when you talk about the forgiveness of sin, and forgiveness of sin is as basic a Christian concept as there is, then for sin to exist, there must be something somewhere that describes sin. What describes sin is the law. But if the law has been abolished, then there is nothing to describe sin, so there is no sin, there is no need for forgiveness. And this convoluted, crazy argument about law and grace, or law or grace, as it's often made, goes on, and people try to follow it and argue about it till they run out of breath to argue it. But he says, I say to you, arise, this man, and take up your bed, go to your house. And immediately he rose, and he took up the bed, and he went forth before them all, insomuch that they were all amazed and glorified God, and said, we never saw anything like this. And I gather they surely had not. And he went forth again by the seaside, and all the multitude resorted to him, and he taught them. And as he went by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the receipt of customs, and said to him, follow me. And he arose and followed him. And it came to pass that as Jesus sat at meat in his house, Levi's house, that many sinners, publicans, together with Jesus and his disciples, came together there to eat, because, in fact, most of Matthew's friends would have fallen in the category of sinners and publicans. Now, why is that here? Do you have any idea? Well, once again, if you are a rules-bound person, the rules say you don't eat with sinners. The rules say you don't company with these people. The rules say that Levi, because he was a publican and he was involved in tax collecting, was a wicked man, and therefore you shouldn't have anything to do with him. That's what the rules said. Jesus said, "Pa on your rules. I have nothing to do with your rules." He flatly ignored their rules, went home with Matthew, ate there with publicans and with sinners. And when the Pharisees saw him eat with publicans and sinners, they said, "Well, how can he do this? He's breaking one of the rules." And Jesus heard it. He said, "They that are whole have no need of a physician, but they that are sick. I'm not come to call the righteous. I'm come to call sinners to repentance." But the disciples of John and the Pharisees, it said, used to fast. And they came and they said to him, "Why do the disciples of John and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples don't fast?" And I don't know if you know this or not, but the fasts of which they were speaking were fasts of rules. There were certain fasts. There were days that you fasted. There were times you were supposed to do it. They had a very specific way of going. We're not talking about a circumstance whereby because you are troubled in your life and you feel you've drifted far from God and you decide that I'm going to seek God and fast and pray and go in my private closet and look for God. That's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about the ordered, regulated fast, because otherwise, how would they know? If we're talking about the personal fast that you make because you feel you need to do so, how would they know? The only way they knew was that on the time when they expected them to be fasting, they weren't. They were eating on the day when John's disciples were fasting. They were eating on the other days that people were fasting. They weren't fasting according to rule. Jesus said, "Can the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they can't fast. We got work to do. We have many things to accomplish. There's no time for us to be fasting. But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them. They shall fast in those days." Then he said this, and this is a very important passage of Scripture. "No man also sews a piece of new cloth on an old garment, else the new piece that fills it up takes away from the old, and the tear is made new. And no man puts new wine into old bottles, else the new wine does burst, and the bottles and the wine are spilled, and everything is ruined. New wine must be put in new bottles. And then he goes on with some other things which are still connected. Now, what in the world let's start with this. What could he be talking about when he speaks of old bottles? Well, the only thing that's working in here up until this time that he's in conflict with is the rule-dominated procedures and so forth of the religious establishment. And he's coming along and telling them, folks, what I am giving to you is new wine. It's not the old rules. It's not the old stuff. And I'm sorry, I can't take what I am bringing to you now and fit it inside your rules, your lines. Take this blackboard, you draw a set of lines up here that suppose this is the framework of our religion. I am sorry, gentlemen. I can't fit my religion and what I'm going to teach inside your lines, your rules, your wineskin. It's new wine. It's going to ferment, and it's going to split your wineskins wide open. Your rules cannot hold what I am telling these people and where we're going with this thing. Now, he wasn't talking about the law of God, because he was at great pains to say, don't think I've come to destroy the law. Rules, maybe, but the law of God, no. Not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from that law till everything has been fulfilled. But in order to understand this, you've got to grasp the fact that the law of God is more than a set of rules. It is a reflection of the character and the will of God Himself, who is merciful, compassionate, forgiving, and who will oftentimes help you through difficult times in your life when you have broken His law, when you have sinned against Him, when you have turned your back on Him and now you've come to yourself. He will forgive. He will be merciful. And you know, mercy is that quality of withholding punishment from someone even when the punishment is due, or especially when it's due. If you withhold it, you are executing an act of mercy. And God does it all the time. Okay? So what I am teaching will not fit inside your wineskins on this particular occasion, the boundaries that you want to place. Then comes another illustration of this very point. And it's an important one. He said, it came to pass they went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and His disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the Pharisees said to Him, why are they doing on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? Well, now, wait a minute. Give me a break. What does the Ten Commandments say? Well, let's see. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, neither you, your manservant, your maidservant, your ox, your ass, your cattle, and all that type of thing. For in 6 days the Lord created the heavens and the earth, and the seventh day He rested. Isn't it something like that? Now, where in that commandment does it tell you you're walking through a field, and there's a head of grain right there, or you're walking through a field with our kind of corn, and you just, pull one off of there, and you shuck it down, and it's good, sweet corn, and you eat it raw right off the cob. You can do that, when it's fresh. And it's good. You can't do that? Where's that in the law? Well, I've read it from kiver to kiver, and I've never found it. It's not there. It's a rule. Who made the rule? Well, let's think about it this way for a minute. Is it lawful, according to the commandment of God, for you to go out and harvest this entire field of wheat on Saturday? Well, no. You're obviously breaking the law, right? Of course. Well, is it lawful to harvest half of it? No. A quarter? No, of course not. A tenth? No. You're doing too much work. And you know how it goes. You go all the way down to a handful. Well, I think that's okay. Question is, where do you draw the line? In order to draw the line, what do you have to have? Ruler. So that you're establishing a rule that says you can do this and you cannot do that. Now, what Jesus says, don't think I've come to destroy the law. Because the law gave you a broad statement that you get there 6 days, you've got to get your work done, and the seventh day is the Sabbath, you're supposed to rest, you're not supposed to work and do that work on that day. Now, that's the law, and that hasn't been abolished. You've got to do that law. But the question is, do you consider it really work to just strip off a handful of grain, rub it between your hands as you walk through, and pop it in your mouth? Well, if you do, you obviously would never put a bag of microwave popcorn in the microwave and punch the buttons and let it pop up for you on the Sabbath day, then would you, if you felt that way? Well, most of you here probably would, but I don't think I'd have to look very far. Maybe I'd put a notice on the internet, I bet I'd find them right away, of people who wouldn't do that and feel it's wrong to do that. Now, there is a big difference between you feeling that it's wrong for you to wash so much as a cup or a saucer on the Sabbath day, and us establishing a rule that you can't do that, or that no one can do that. Do you understand the difference between them? You make a decision for yourself as to how you're going to observe the Sabbath based upon the law. That's yours. If we as a church or as a religious establishment were to set a rule that says you can't do that, well, then we've got to concern ourselves with the enforcement of that rule in our religious community. We've got to determine how that rule is going to be carried out. For example, if we decided to decree for the church, read some of Peter's words or about women are supposed to be modestly dressed and all this type of thing. Well, what's modest? Well, they shouldn't wear the skirts too short. Well, how short is too short? Now, the way you handle that, of course, is that you establish a rule that they got to be within 12 inches of the floor. And then if you got to do that, then you have to enforce your rule, which means you sit on the floor, you got the ruler in your hand, and the girl walks by and you put it there and you say, okay, that one makes it, that one makes it. No, got a quarter of an inch to let this one down. That's what rules are all about, folks. That's what rules are all about. They draw lines for people so you will know when you're transgressing and you will know when you're safe. It's the sort of thing that leads people to build a fence around the law and to actually try to observe the Sabbath day from 30 minutes before sundown to 30 minutes after sundown to be sure that we just don't get too close. But what they have done is to draw a new line to create a new rule. And then when you try to impose those rules on other people and as a religious establishment, you create the situation that Jesus walked into with the scribes and the Pharisees. And he and his disciples were walking through the field, plucking the ears of grain, eating that. It was not lawful. Nobody was suggesting that it was wrong for them to eat them because it was somebody else's field. You know why? Because the law explicitly allowed you to do that. If you're passing through someone's field or orchard and you're hungry, you can eat a cluster of grapes right there and go on your way. But you can't take them with you. That's the law. It's in the book. It's there. That's an easy to understand principle. You don't want to keep a stranger passing through your field who's really hungry from having a bite of your grapes or having a handful of grain that you've got. You just don't want him carrying it off, and ripping you off and taking it home like that. So the law permitted that. Their problem was the rule about, they said that you could not so much as pluck one ear of corn on the Sabbath day. So they said, why do your disciples do on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said to them, have you never read what David did when he had need and was hungry, he and they that were with him, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests, and gave to them that were with him? Never read that, did you? Now, this is a really fascinating little story right here. And there was not a thing in the world the men could say about it, because they knew it as well as Jesus did, that David had done that there was no shame involved in it, that it's not even offered as a sin in the Old Testament. They knew that had happened. Not only that, but Jesus in this case cites something that really was not lawful, because the law did say they couldn't do that, right? So now we're dealing not with something that the law is very general about, and you've drawn rules and we've transgressed your rules. Sorry about that. Now we're going to step further out and we're going to do something about a law of God that says you're not to eat of this. He says it was not lawful, and they did it. Haven't you read that? Well, what's Jesus trying to tell them in this case? That you can disregard the law of God anytime you want to? Yeah, you can. Didn't you know that? You can disregard the law of God anytime you want to. You probably do it every day. It's called sin. And we do it. So, yeah, you can disregard the law. Somebody wrote me a letter. I've heard this expression before. Well, are you saying that we can pick and choose which ones of God's laws that we're going to observe? Yeah, sure. We've been doing it all our lives. We decide today we're going to be honest with people, and tomorrow we decide we're going to lie. We didn't steal, but we didn't lie. So we picked the one and chose the other one. What are you talking about? Yeah, we pick and choose all the time. But the key element, and the thing which I think is so poorly understood, is that the law is there as a guide to life, not as a set of rules, and that there are times when there are exceptions even to the law of God, and Jesus just gave us one, didn't He? Now that scares the daylights out of rule makers and people who try to keep religious organizations under control. They think if you tell people that you can make an occasional exception to the law of God, that they'll just run amok and they'll do anything they please. Well, they can do that anyway, can't they? They can do anything they please tomorrow if they want to do anything tomorrow. The question is that when you do it, do you know that what you are doing is an exception? Do you know that it has a reason? And do you know that God will not disapprove of what you are doing? Because here's a situation where what did He say about it? He said they went there when they were hungry, wasn't it? They had need and they were hungry. That was the two things that they used as justification. Now, they sort of played a little word game. The priest said, well, let me see. Well, the guys are holy. They haven't been around women for 2 or 3 days. And the bread is kind of unholy in a way because it was sanctified yesterday and it's off the table. And they hemmed and hawed around, and they found a reason to go ahead and allow those men to eat that bread rather than stand there and fall down in the dirt, because they didn't have anything to eat. I think it's really interesting to see Jesus pull that example out. It's another example of Rex Lex. God is king. The law is not. The law is a guide. It's a lamp. You do what's wrong, it's going to hurt you. You are going to pay for it. But there are times in life when you are faced with challenges that the letter of the law and the rules that people make just won't serve you. Now, I don't know. I think I would have had I don't know how, if I was going to die, I might have eaten it, but I would have been a hard man to persuade that I'll eat any of that showbread. I really would have. It would have been very, very difficult for me to do. And so it would be with many other aspects of God's law and things that I know about. But the fact that I might do so on one occasion would not in any way mean that I thought the law was set aside, that it was done away with, and that tomorrow I would not be observing that law as strictly and as carefully as I had ever observed it before. There are classic illustrations people bring up from time to time. Well, what if you're starving to death on a desert island and the only thing to eat there is an old pig that you find there? You eat the pig to stay alive, would you? Or would you not? I'll allow you to have that interesting discussion over table here after a few moments to just give yourself a little test as to how rule-bound you are or how, just exactly what your approach is on these things. But anyway, he then goes on to make this very important statement in verse 27. He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. The Son of Man, therefore, is Lord of the Sabbath. Now, when you look at this in its context, as a declaration, all the way from the beginning of this man had authority and spoke with authority and cast out demons with authority, all the way down to this statement right here, you can't misunderstand what he is saying about this statement. What he is saying is, I am the Prince of Peace. I am the King. And the King is Lord over the law. The reason why the law is because I said so. It's because I made it so. I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. And so, who decides what is a transgression of the Sabbath and what is not? Well, He does, doesn't He? He is the authority. There's a real simple concept involved in this that I think that we need to give some prayerful thought to about the question of whether or not the law is king or whether God is king. A very important distinction to make. And Jesus entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there that had a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. And he said to the man that had the withered forth, stand up. And he said to them, looking around at the men assembled there, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or to do evil? To save life or to kill? And there was not a man in the room that would answer the question. They would not say a word. And when he had looked around on them with anger, one of the very rare occasions where you see Jesus with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, stretch forth your hand, and he stretched it out, and his hand was restored like the other. Lest you think his anger might have been unjustified, he says, the Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. And go figure, We've got a man that's been attending church with us for 15 years. All of us know him. He can't use this one hand because it's dried up, and he can't even bury the ring. He can't even pull it away from his body. It's just always tucked up right against his body. We've looked at the hand. We've tried to sneak a peek at it when he didn't know we were looking, just to see how bad it really was. Children whispered about it and talked about it. He's a fixture among us. On the Sabbath day, when our rules say you don't heal because healing is a kind of work, Jesus asked this man, says, stand up in the middle. And he stands up, and then he looks around at all of us and he says, tell me this, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or evil? The question hardly needs an answer. Is it lawful to save life or to kill? What can we do on the Sabbath and what can we not do? And they wouldn't answer him. And he looked around, and he was angry because of the brittle, hard, cold hearts. And the reason of this was that these were a people who saw the rules as everything. And it's like I said about the law earlier. It's like that old song goes, I think, about the Mississippi River, in flood. She's hard, and she's cold, and she's mean. And the law does tend to be that way. It makes demands on you. And when you make it into a set of rules that are administered by a bunch of human beings who want to maintain control over the things that are going on, then you really got hard, cold, and mean. And he was just angry with them all. And he said, stretch out your hand. The man stretched out his hand and became whole like the other one. I know you people here, if that happened in this room, you would all feel like falling on your face and before God and realize the power that was there and cry out in thanksgiving to God completely. But these people went out of that room, and because Jesus threatened their rule structure, which was their instrumentation or instrumentality of control, they wanted him destroyed, dead. So you might give some thought to this. I really am a very, very firm believer in the law of God. I do not believe that so much as a jot or a tittle has passed from it. I believe that every word of it is there for us to read, to receive, and to try to work into our lives according to the best judgment that God gives us. But I also know one other thing that is very important. The law is not the king. Jehovah is the king.
Turn the Page is a production of the Ronald L. Evangelistic Association. To contact us or for more information, please visit our website, RLDEA.com.